Hello and welcome to today's video where we'll continue talking about sockets. So this is part 2 out of 2, and it's going to be a simple client-server application in Android Studio, presented as always the easy way. In the first video, we have talked about a simple client app. It was about getting a time from a server in the US. Now we will do a simple client-server communication. We'll have two applications. These two, one will be a client app, one will be a server app. The client will be provided with a server IP and a server port. Using this information, the client will connect to the server, and the server will send back a greeting saying hello to server and 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number of the connection is. So this is very simple. We will run it in an emulator and we will send this information to the server. So the information will be sent then back from the server to the client. And this is the basis for a simple chat app or whatever you want to build using this architecture. But without making the intro any longer, let's go to Android Studio and see the code and see exactly how it's done. As usual, you will start by opening Android Studio and you will create a new project that will be an empty activity project for phones and tablets. And once the project is loaded completely, it will look something like this. Let me just increase the size. You have the main activity Java file here with the main code of the application. This is where we will write it. And you also have the activity main XML file. This is the user interface of the application. This is where we will build the UI. And here on the left side, you have the project folder. And this is where you see the files and the folders that are included in your project. And before we will actually start and build anything, we will go to the manifest file, and this is found in the app folder. Then you go to the manifest folder, you open, and you can see the Android manifest XML file, and you open it. And this is where we need to add some permissions for the application. And I start by doing this because otherwise I will forget, and later on I'll just get some errors when I'm trying to run the app. These are the permissions I'm adding. This is for the access to internet, access to network state, and access to Wi-Fi state. I usually put all three of them because it's better this way. In case my application will use Wi-Fi and will check the network state and so on, it's better to have them all here to begin with. So you add these permissions and then you just save the file and you can close it. Okay, now we can minimize the folder view. And you can see here the user interface as it is right now. So let's start building the user interface, and then I will explain what I've done. Until this point, I've prepared the user interface for the client application. And as you can see, I have a text view, and this was the initial Hello World text view. I've just renamed it to display client so we can keep track of which application is which. We'll have the server application built shortly. Then I have this text view that says no message from server. And here is the place where we will display the information that we received from the server. So the message from the server will be displayed here. Then I have two plain texts. They allow me to enter the text, the information, which is the server IP and the server port. And then you just press the connect to server button to use this information and connect to the server, then receive the information to display it here. So this is the user interface. Now let's go to the main activity Java file and add the proper or the necessary code there. We will start by declaring some variables. Until this point, I've declared some variables for the text view, the edit text boxes, the button, and the string, and the string which will be the server name, and the integer value which will be the server port. Next, we have to go in the onCreate method and associate this with the proper controls in the user interface. And for this, we'll just use the find view by ID. Until this point, we have associated each variable above for the text view, for the edit text, for the button, and we've all associated them with the proper controls in the user interface. Now, what we have to do is just go and define the onClick method that will be executed when we press the button. And for this, we say public void, and the name of the method was onClick connect, if I remember correctly, and we have to say the view. Inside this method, what we have to do is collect the information from the edit text boxes. So we have to take the server IP and the server port. We have to get this information, then we have to pass it and connect to the server. And for this, we'll need a new thread. But to take them step by step, let's get the server name and server port. So we get the content of the edit text server port, and then we convert that value to an integer, and you save it inside this variable. So after these two lines of code, we have a server name and a server port, and we can move ahead to the next part of the program, which is actually connecting to the server. And for this, we need a different thread because you cannot do server or network operations on the main thread, which is where we are right now as we execute this code. So we need to create a new thread, and we can do it by saying new thread. I had a typo, so we have a new thread, and this will be a new runnable. Okay, so this is very jumpy. My Visual Studio jumps a lot, as you can see. Okay, the code is generated automatically, and we'll have to put here at the end a start. Okay, and inside the void run method, we have to put the code which will be executed as we are trying to connect to the server. And the first thing we need to do is have a socket. And we need to import this. All right. So we call it socket as well, and this will be a new socket. And we have to provide the server name and the server port. So we say server name. And okay, server port. My Visual Studio is a bit lagging for some reason, but we'll just soldier on. And as you can see, you have this red underlining. If you click on it, and you can see this red light bulb, click on the arrow, and it will suggest that you surround this expression with a try-catch, which you should do. All right. It is generated automatically, and now you can continue adding the code inside this try part. Now you can access the input stream that you will use to get the information from the server, and for this you'll need the socket. But before that, let's have a buffer reader declared. So we have buffer reader Java in out. We call it BR from buffer reader input. And this will be a new buffered reader, of course. And inside we have a new input stream reader, because we need to read the input stream, obviously. And then we have to indicate which is the source, and the source will be socket get input stream. I really like how Android Studio can suggest exactly what we need to add. And we close this part. Next, you need to take this information that you will get and put it inside a string. And for this, you declare a string and you say, let's call it text from server. This will be equal to buffered reader input read line. Okay, now you have the information from the server all saved in this string, and you need to display it for the user to see. So what was the message that we get from the server? And for this, keep in mind we are in a worker thread right now. We have created this thread and we are inside it. we need to go back to the user interface on the main thread or the UI thread and update the text view there. So we say run on UI thread, and this will be a new runnable. Okay, so it jumped again. And that's all we need to do. We can save this part of the application. And I will just recap really shortly, because this is the most important part of the entire client part. So when you press the button, let's take it from the beginning, you will have the client where you enter the server IP, you enter the server port, and then you click connect to server. When you click connect to server, here in the main activity Java code, this method will be executed on click connect, which is the name we gave. We could have named this method whatever we wanted. So when you press the button and this gets executed, you will grab the server name and the server port from those edit text boxes. So from those edit texts, then you will create a new thread. And inside this new thread, you will create a new socket because you need a socket to connect to a server, and you will pass the server name and the server port because you need to know which is your address where you want to connect to. So where is your server located? Okay, so you pass this information, you create your socket, then you can use this socket to get the stream of information that flows from the server back to the client. And for you to be able to read more efficiently or easier, you need to create a buffered reader. And you gave it a name. This buffered reader will use the input stream reader, and you will access it through the socket. So you will have socket.get input stream, and that information will be placed in a string. And from this string, you can just display it on the user interface in this text view. However, you need to create a new thread so as not to cause the application to crash, because you need to modify this text view on the UI thread, and here you are in a worker thread. So this is all that you have to do in the client part. As I say, you can save everything, and now you have to create the server part of the application. And for this, you will just go to File, you will say New Module, and you will call this My Application Server, for example. And this will be a new empty activity. Activity will be my main activity server, and you finish. Once everything has loaded completely, you can see here you have two apps. You have the initial one, this is the client app, and then you have the second one, which we have called My Application Server. And you can regard this as two different projects or two different apps in a single project. We can leave the first one minimized, we don't need it anymore, and we can just focus on the second one. As you can see, the XML file, the main activity XML file for the server is opened as well, and you have the main activity Java file for the server here opened and ready for you to modify. But before we actually start and modify the code and create the user interface, we have to go to My Application Server. You go to the manifest folder and you open the Android manifest, just as you did for the initial client app, and you will add the necessary user permissions. And as you have seen before, by default, I just give it permission to access the internet, the network state, and the Wi-Fi state. I will save it, and I can close this Android manifest file. Now I can focus on building the user interface. And just as before, I will just create the user interface, and then I will explain what I've done. Until this point, I have created the user interface of this application, and I have one text view here on top saying server. So you can identify which application is which. The other one says client. And then you have some information. You have the server IP, which will be displayed, the server name, the server port, which will be displayed, and the connection status, whether there is a client connected or waiting for clients or no connection, whatever the situation may be. Then you have two buttons, the start server and stop server. So you can wait for connections from the clients, or you can just stop the server and nobody would be able to connect. And this is the user interface. The next part of the application will be just to start and write the code. And for this, we go to the main activity server file. Don't forget to save everything. And let's start with some variables. Until this point, I have declared some variables for the server name, server port, and status, and this will be associated with the text views on the user interface. And I've created a string for the address of the server. If I'm not mistaken, this is my IP in the emulator. However, when the application is built, I will just open the emulator and I will just check, and then I will change it if I need to. So I'm not really sure about this one. I'll just make a comment. Check your own IP address in the emulator or real device. Okay, and choose your own port number. Should be greater than. Okay, and avoid reserved ones like 8080, for example, and so on. Just for you to know what the deal is here with the server IP and server port. Okay, let's go to the onCreate method. Here I will just associate the variables with the views in the user interface, so nothing too interesting. I'll just go quick over this part. Okay, so let's go to the interesting part where we have to create an inner class, and this inner class, this will be the server thread. So we say class server thread. This will extend thread and it will implement runnable. Okay. And for this class, we have to declare some variables. Let's say we'll need a private boolean, and this will be server running, because we will need to check whether the server is running or not. Then we'll need a server socket, because this is how we can accept connections from other clients by having one of these objects. So we just call it server socket. And what I want to do, I just want to count how many clients connect. So I'll just say private integer count, or client count, doesn't matter, we'll just start with 0. Okay, so this is. Okay, so let's see. Inside this class, we'll have several methods, and one will be to start the server. This will be a public void start server. And when we start the server, what we want to do, we'll take this server running boolean and we'll make it true when we start the server, and we'll just say start. And this will actually start our thread. Let me delete here. Okay. Next, we have to implement a run. Actually, we'll override the run method. So for this, you right click, you say generate, and then you say override methods. And then you go for the run method and you say okay. And inside here, you can just delete this super part. And this is what we'll do. First, we have to create that socket that I talked about. So we say server socket. And this will be new or equal to new server socket. And we have to give it the port. So we want to know which port we are using to create this socket on. So we just say server port. As you can see, we have this red underlining. So we click on it, we go to the light bulb, and you say surround with try catch again. All right, so moving on. When we open this socket and we are awaiting connections for other clients, we need to actually to know. Let's display this for the user to see that the server is running. So we say run on user interface, and will be a new runnable. Okay, I'm sorry, it's again this jumping. You see what I mean? Just when I'm ready to double click, the list will jump and I will click on something else. So anyway, I'm creating a new runnable, and inside here I'll just say text view status, and this will change to set text. We'll just say waiting for clients. So this is waiting. So this is when the server is up and running and waiting to connect, for clients to connect. Okay, now next step is actually waiting for the clients. So we say while we have this server running, and this is where we use again our Boolean. So while this is true, this is when we'll accept connections. And we'll create for each new client that connects, we'll need to create a new socket. So let's have a socket from java.net, and we call it socket. This will be equal to server socket dot accept. We are accepting a new client. Next, we increment the number of connected clients. So we say count plus plus, and we want to display the information because this client, when it connects, it will have an IP. And let's display this for the user to see. Again, we will run on the user interface, and we'll have a new runnable. And inside here, we'll just say text view status. This time we'll display set text, will display the details about the client which has connected. So it will be connected to, and from the socket we'll get, where is it? Get the address, and we'll just add the port. I'm sorry, I forgot a plus here. So we have connect to plus server. From the socket we get the address, then we put 2 dots, and then we say again from the socket we'll get the local port. Okay, so this should be enough over here. Let's go further. What we need to do, we need to send information back to this client. So we'll just say a print. We need a print writer. This is from the Java in out. And the print router, I'm sorry, the print writer will just be output server. So output server, this will be equal to a new print writer. And we say the socket get output stream. Now using the output server that we have just created, we'll just write, okay, and we're going to write a string, and the string will be welcome to server, and I will just add the number of the connection just to send something. I mean, it can be anything, but just to have an example, just to show you, I'm just putting this text message with some variable that is incremented every time somebody new connects or you have a new connection. And then just to send the information, we say output server dot flush. Lastly, we are closing the socket. So we say socket dot close. Okay, so next, once this is done, we are still in the server thread and we need to implement a way to stop the server from running. And for this, we have a different method. We say public void, and we'll say stop server. And what we actually do, first, when we stop the server, we'll just say server running, this boolean. This time it will become false. Then we have to create a new thread. And we have inside new runnable. And we'll just start this thread. And what we execute inside is very simple. First, we have to check if our server socket, if this one is not null, because we don't want to open a closed connection. I'm sorry, we don't want to close a closed connection. So what we do when this is null, so we have to try and close the connection. So we say server socket dot close. Okay, and generate for this a try catch as well. And when we close this connection, I'm sorry, I keep saying close connection again, it's actually closing the socket that accepts the connections, but I hope you get the point. We have to say run on user interface thread just to display the information to the user so he knows what's happening. And what information will display? It will be just the text view status saying the connection is closed. Or actually, we should say the server is closed or stopped. Server stopped. This should be better. Okay, we can just delete some of these parts. This is from the stop server. Going back outside this server thread inner class, what we have to do, we have to implement the method will be executed when you press this start server and stop server buttons, because we only talked about what happens inside this server thread inner class, but we have to handle these two methods as well for the buttons. So we say public void on click start server. Okay, we have view. We have to import this view as well, and we have to instantiate this class and start this method, the start server. And for this, let's create this private server thread, and we just call it server thread. Okay. Now, using this newly created server thread, we will create a new instance of this class. Okay, and we will just access server thread, the start server method inside. Start server, here you are. And that's all you have to do. Then for stopping the server, I'm just going to copy this entire part. Instead of on click start server, this will be stop server. And instead of having a new object, we're just going to have stop server. Okay, this is the stop server. I believe this is all that we should do. I'll just go over the code again and I'll explain it to you and we'll see if anything is missing. So we have the user interface built over here with our 3 text views and 2 buttons. So in the code, we have the text views over here. Then we have the string address, the server address and the port number that we have assigned. Inside the onCreate method, you just make the connection between your variables and the controls in the user interface. Then you display the server name and the server port. Then you finish the onCreate method. You have 2 buttons, and each button has a method that gets executed when you press on that button. First is onClick start server, which will create a new instance of a server thread. And this server thread is an inner class. And you use this start server method to actually execute some code and allow clients to connect. I'll show you this in a moment. When you press the stop, you just execute the stop server method. Both of these methods are inside this class. So when you go inside the class, you have some variables. Then you have the start server method, which actually only changes a Boolean variable to change the status of the server, so you know it's running or it's not running, and then starts the thread, and this is what gets executed. What happens, and this is the most important part of the server application, you have a new socket created on this port, which you have assigned, and this is the same port that the client uses to connect to your server. Then you update the user interface. You say that you're waiting for the clients. Then, as long as the server is running, so after you press the start button and the server starts running, this will be true. So you keep looping around in this while loop. And every time you are, for every new client that comes, you are creating a new socket. So you accept its connection, you increase the number of the connections, you display the information to the user with the server IP, the IP you get from the socket and the local port. Then you create some information to send back to the client. And this information is very simple, just a welcome to server and the number of the connection. And then you close the socket. So every time you have a new connection, you open a socket, perform these steps, and you close the socket. Then when you want to stop the entire server, what you do, you execute this stop server method, and this is called when you press the button, and you change the Boolean variable. So you know that the server is stopped. You create a new thread, and inside this new thread, you will check if your server socket is or not opened. So if it's opened, basically not null, then you want to close it. And when you close it, you just update the user interface saying that the server has stopped. And that's all you have to do. Okay, let's save everything and give it a go. I will just start by selecting my client app, and this is my virtual device, and I'm going to run it. Once the first application has loaded, you go here and select the second application. And in my case, I use the same virtual machine and I launch it as well. And it will take a bit of time. Let's wait. It appears that we have some issue with our server application. It has stopped. So if I'm looking here in run, okay, we have an exception. String ID, unable to start activity. Okay, there's no point running it again, so I can just stop the server application. All right, and I'm going up here. And after a bit of troubleshooting, the problem is with this text view, the set text will accept a string value inside, and this server port is actually an integer. So what we have to do, we have to say string dot value of, and then we'll just give this integer inside. So that was our problem. I save everything. I still have my server app selected, and I press the run button. This time the application, the server app has loaded, and let me just increase the screen size a bit. You can see the server part, you have the IP, you have the port, you have no connection yet, and the two buttons. If I press here, you can see we have the client app and we have the server app. The client app is not connected yet, so what I will do, I will just start the server. Now it says waiting for clients. I will switch to the client app, and I will give it the server IP. It's 10.0.2.15, and the server port is 1234. Okay, so I will just say connect, and it says welcome to server first connection. And if I switch back to the server application, it says connect to, connected to. Okay, now if I want to press again, let me show you, I'm moving back to the client. Remember, the server opened the connection, send the message to the client, and closed the connection. If I want to connect again, it will say second connection or the third one. And if I'm going back to the server and is the same client connected, if I stop the server is now stopped. I should be able to return to the client and not connect anymore. Nope, nothing happens now. So no more connection. Okay, so this is just a very quick example of a client server app. Sadly, I have both the client and the server in the same emulator. Ideally, you will have two different devices. You can run the client on one and the server on one. If you have two mobile phones, or if you have a server installed on your computer, you can try it out. I only have this Android Studio, so this is the best I could do for now. Anyway, I hope you have learned something today. I hope this will be helpful for you in the future to build your own apps. If you have questions, suggestions, anything to share with myself or with the community, please leave a comment below. And until we meet in the next video, take care and keep practicing.